Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here with you. We had a chance to just briefly touch base before beginning this panel, and I was just expressing my delight as I saw in some of the comments coming through the chat. I can't even imagine this conference happening 5 years ago. So it's so incredible to be in this discussion, to be part of a sea change in our understanding, and to really be bringing a solid evidence-based practice to the work we do that is not discounting where we come from and our history and our past and our understanding, but is building upon all of that to fully enrich the work that we do for ourselves and for the people that we serve. So I am going to dive in with that sense of delight about the work that we're doing and just an engagement with all of you. Okay. Good. You guys can see Alma Center, Heal, Transform, Evolve. We're good to go. Okay. You have a window. Those of you who attended Jojpa's session yesterday have a window into our work because Jojpa is one of the co-creators and founders of the Alma Center. So hopefully you will see our roots and some of that reflected here. And we've been working on this for the past 20 years. And our mission here at the Alma Center in Milwaukee is to heal, transform, and involve the unresolved impacts of trauma that fuels cycles of violence and abuse. And we work with people who are at risk of or have caused a history of causing harm in their intimate relationships, excuse me, and or family. And this is the part that's so amazing to me that we're actually talking about in this conference. Heal, transform, and evolve trauma with people who have a history of causing harm. That's not something that we would have been talking about 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. So it's a very exciting and compelling development. And from our perspective at the Alma Center, we really try to dive into this understanding of trauma and have come to an understanding of it through the lens of human development and also through compassion. And that's not something that's just unique in our understanding. I just want to say we are, like, as many of us are on this webinar, we're eager learners and studiers. We think of ourselves as the translators. Read the hard stuff, read the deep science, and translate it into practical applied work. So we do a lot of work with the leading theorists in trauma. We do a lot of work in feminist theory, in race, racism, racial relations, our understanding of ourselves through social identity, what's going on in the criminal justice system, our spiritual teachers, and you will see Jojpa, hopefully she showed this book yesterday. Jojpa is one of the deep spiritual teachers for our work. And all of these, we feel like it's our job to really study, understand, and translate. Not stay up here, but translate in ways that are very applied and very practical. And so that's the work that I want to present today. And hopefully I don't think that it's anything new. I think I heard a lot of what we're talking about yesterday. I just want to present it in a way that it's like, oh, we have a shared language around that. Oh, we have shared visuals around that, shared understanding. So in order, because we're rooted in a sense of human development, we'd like to start right at the core. Who are we? And one way to do that is to take a moment right now. And I imagine that all of us here have had the opportunity to hold a newborn baby, to see a newborn baby, to look in the eyes of a newborn baby. And I just want you to just imagine, put yourself in that place of imagining that and thinking about what you see, what you witness, and what you experience with the baby. And what we believe, our grounding for our understanding is that this is our baby. We can tell with a little curly Q on top. We believe that all of us, it's our birthright, that all of us are born loving, lovable, connected, capable, worthy, and whole. And that's how we come into the world. And we understand that to be our authentic self, that is not just about those characteristics of us, but also about the way that we show up. We show up with our emotions like intact. We already are able to feel those emotions in a sensory experience of them. And we are born with our brain wired to thrive in this world. And all of this comes together in the ways that we actually land here. And like I said, that's our understanding of our authentic self. That's there, it's in all of us. And it's really an important grounding and understanding because it means that we have the sense, the knowing, the knowledge that all of us are born whole. We're all born with this. And the reality, however, is that many of us show up in ways that have this clouded over. And we may not have those same sense of ourselves as loving, lovable, capable, worthy, whole. And we may act in ways out in the world that are very disconnected from the truth of who we are. Might be violent, controlling, coercive, abusive. And that's how we show up toward other people. And when we see that showing up in our world, we have traditionally asked ourselves, what is wrong with this person showing up in this way, acting out in violent, coercive, not seeing that, not showing up in their truth. And how we have traditionally answered that in this field is that when people show up violent, coercive, controlling, abusive, using those behaviors, we've said that we know what's wrong with them. They're perpetrators, they're abusers, they're batterers, they're deadbeat dads. And that understanding of who a person is really important, because the truth is that how we see people, how we understand them, is how we serve them. So if we're showing up in the space with other people and somebody walks in and we think we know who they are, they've showed up with this violent, coercive behavior, and we think that we know, that means that they're a bad or a perpetrator, abuser, a deadbeat dad, we're going to treat them in that way. How do I treat somebody who is a batterer, who is an abuser, who is a deadbeat dad? It means we can disconnect from their humanity, disconnect from the truth of who they are, and treat them by their behavior. And that what we do with that is to just step back into question, like thinking about how do we understand? How do we see the people who are in front of us? Because we might be seeing a duck. Oh, I know what this duck is. This duck's a batter abuser. But in reality, if we just do a little bit of reflecting, a little bit of changing around our interpretation, we can see a rabbit. And when we see a rabbit, we have a whole different response to what we're doing than if we see the duck. The optical illusion, and that's on our perception. It doesn't mean that this picture doesn't show up any differently as a rabbit or a duck. It's how we perceive that picture, is how we respond to it. When we see people showing up violent, controlling, coercive, abusive, and all the ways that people can hurt and harm each other, it changes our question then from what is wrong with this person and how can I define and label this person to, wow, what happened? Beneath that, I know there is the truth, the authentic self. So what happened to this person to disconnect that truth inside? And we've known, you can ask yourself what happens. Think about all the things that you've witnessed, you've heard about, you've experienced, people have told you about the ways that people cause hurt and harm in their relationships, in their families. The yelling and screaming, put downs and belittling, jealousy, lack of trust, self-absorbed, the selfishness, the narcissistic behavior, judgments and assumptions, mind games, gaslighting, manipulation, isolation. This list goes on and on. We've been developing this list for a long time of lying, deception, and cheating, resentment, revenge, humiliation, walking around in a silent treatment. All of this manifests in control and coercion, and threats and intimidation, physical violence, the ways that people physically harm each other, the ways that people sexually harm each other. And we think of all these potential real ways that people can cause hurt and harm in relationships. And imagine that actually being like the home. And the home is a metaphor, not that we all live in this home, but just thinking about, wow, this is an environment where people are living together. And imagine then how that can be exasperated, all of that behavior exasperated by drugs and alcohol and other forms of addiction, trying to soothe some of that pain, or manifest in anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues that makes all of the ways that people can cause hurt and harm even more manifest. And then we imagine what it means to have a baby. That's that same baby that you envisioned holding in your hand, just open, innocent, and ready and eager to learn. A baby dropping into that environment. And how does that impact? How does that impact the baby? Does it matter? Does it matter? And I want to step back here and say, this is a moment in time when we're looking at a house like this. But I think what's really important to understand that this isn't an environment, a house, a home where parents don't care, don't love their children. This isn't about bad parents, bad caregivers, bad people. This is the reality of what happens in trauma, is that it didn't start here. It started before this generation and before that generation. It's an intergenerational trauma. So that any pain that's experienced in the generations before us that's not transformed is going to be transformed forward in the way that that was talked about yesterday. And important because although we can look at individual lives, we have to put those lives in the context of where did this come from? And it helps us actually step away from the blame of the people who are our caretakers, who are our parents, but really trying to understand what's happening here. What's happening? It didn't start with me. It didn't start with them. It didn't start with their parents. And it didn't even start in our home necessarily, because these homes that we grow up in are surrounded by the reality of the culture that we exist in. And our cultural context here in the United States includes colonialism, the genocide, the oppression, the destruction of cultures, chattel slavery, where human beings were literally and statutorily and functionally and practically treated as less than human, and the manifestations of that in racism and white supremacy. It's rooted in patriarchy in our culture, that the standard is a male, women are less than, anything not male is less than, and in the way that manifests in heterosexism. And then we live in a culture of capitalism, meaning that individual wealth, individual gathering, that is the defining characteristic of our culture. And that means that it's above the way we care for people. And we think about this as our understanding of historical and cultural trauma. So although we land in an environment that feels like everything we know about the world, understanding of how it all got there, it's all interwoven, all interconnected, all manifest in the ways that our people who care for us and ourselves show up. And when we think about that reality, that we were Homo sapiens, us as people, we only came to this world, this earth, 150,000 years ago, right? And 140,000 of those we spent in hunting gathering societies, where we cared for each other in groups and bands and worked together. And it wasn't until 10,000 years ago that agricultural Neolithic revolution, and we settled in little communities or bigger communities and started to farm areas, and it was more settled peoples and communities 10,000 years ago in our overall history. And about 400 years ago, our culture in the United States of colonization, transatlantic slave trade, the violence that founded the Western culture here, 170 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, and today. So when we think about all the ways that this culture has manifested in us, we're talking about a tiny little piece of our history that we're taking as our reality and our understanding, and that's manifesting in our real life. And that's important, I think, to understand from a human development perspective, because what it teaches us is that this is not normal. This is not the way necessarily that we're meant to be, that we developed as humans. It's not our evolutionary way of being with each other. It's a very tiny snapshot in time of a culture, and that culture has seeped into our way of being, and that seeps into the way that we show up. And seeps into the way that we show up in all the many different manifest ways. And as I said, that means that any pain that's happened in all those generations back, in all the ways that culture has seeped into our ways that we relate and interact with each other, any pain from that is not transformed in the generations before us is transferred onto us. But we don't know any of that when we're a little baby popping in. We're just like, here I am in this world. What is this world? It's all wide open to me. And everything I know about this world, I'm learning right here in this environment. And does it matter where I land? Does it matter? One way that we're able to take a look at that is that some of us, despite all those things that are going on around of us, many, not just some of us, many people work on healing and restoring them to the truth of themselves. And they can show up in this environment. They've transformed their pain. They show up in this environment differently for the children who land in. So they're showing up having done the work on themselves, and showing up in a different kind of way with attunement to their children, with valuing, putting them first, making them the center of what's going on, with attention, paying careful attention to the needs, to the development of the child, nurturing, wraparound nurturing, safety and protection, showing affection, touching, hugging, loving on the child, a consistency, able to show up in ways that we're staying in control of our own selves, playful and enjoyment, that there's actual like laughter and joy in life and attentiveness and listening and reliability, creating structures and boundaries, communicating effectively, vulnerability, celebration, encouragement. This doesn't mean that the people who show up in this way are the good people, and people who show up a different in manifesting of their pain are the bad people. It just means that we're at different places on our own healing journey, right? But I want to imagine that this is the same baby popping into this environment. Not a different baby, not a good baby, the other a bad baby, but the same baby popping in here. And we ask ourselves then, it's a great vantage point for trying to understand, does it matter? Does it matter where I land? And so we've unpacked this into trying to articulate the different ways that this actually matters in our lives. And we think about the same baby landing in both environments, learning everything we need to know about the world from that environment, from where we've landed. And what happens? Right off the bat, if we land in an environment where our parents are struggling with their own trauma, we get the message very quickly. Whoa, this world is unsafe. This is a dangerous world that I've landed in. I'm not protected in this world. Whereas if we land in a world where the people who are caring for us have done their own work, have healed from their own pain, our worldview is completely different. This world is safe. I'm protected in this world. People look out for me in this world. And so we literally are landing in two different worlds that are neither one of them right or wrong, neither one of them good or bad. It's our genius, our little thriving genius brain making sense, early sense of the world. Oh, the world's dangerous. And again, if we land in the place where the world is dangerous, we have to make sense of that. And we don't look out to our parents and make sense of it by what's wrong with them. We're not even at that level. So babies, we make sense of it by what's wrong with us. Ooh, this is a dangerous world. People don't protect me. And why is that happening? Something must be wrong with me. I'm bad. I don't belong. I'm unworthy. I'm wrong. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving. Whereas if we land in a world that's supportive and sees the truth of who we are, we get to grow in our understanding of our truth. Oh, I'm having the experience that I am lovable. Oh, people are receiving what I'm putting out. I'm having the experience that I'm loving. People celebrate what I do. I'm having the experience I'm capable. People are relish me. I'm having the experience I'm enough and I'm whole. And we grow in those understandings of ourselves. We come with our emotions intact. And if we land in a world that's very dangerous, that's very unprotected, that's unsafe for us, that's a scary world. And we walk around feeling very frightened, very angry, very afraid, but we're not walking around at this point, but we exist feeling very frightened, angry, sad. But those are not feelings that are received in a world that's dangerous. Those feelings themselves can be dangerous in the world. And they're painful, so we learn to shut down that pain, not feel what we're feeling inside. Whereas if we land in a world that is fully supportive of us, we grow in our emotional awareness, our emotional capacity, our ability to feel the fullness of our emotions. It impacts the way our brain develops. Because if we land in the world that is supporting us, our brain gets developed in the way that's dangerous. Our brain is developing in the way of survival. What's out there? What's next? I have to be constantly on guard. This world is out to get me. In a safe world, we get to just Curiously engage in the world. What's this? I'm learning this. Wow, what is all this world about? Curiously engage in the world. And we learn a different understanding of our relationship in the world. In a dangerous world, we really do learn that this world is out to get me. I need to protect myself. I need to be safe in this world. In a safe, supportive environment, we learn just exactly that. This world's not out to get me. This world is out to gift me, to support me, to support my growth in the world. And we have different jobs when we have these different environments. My job is to survive a dangerous environment, whereas my job is to thrive in a supportive environment. And I want to take a second just to reiterate, these are not good or bad parents, good or bad families. These are just what is manifest, what manifests from unresolved pain that gets carried forward. And it's also important to realize that we used to think of trauma. I used to think of trauma as the bad things that happen. But this was my understanding of trauma, and I would be looking for it. Ooh, what happened to you? But it's not, it's also the case that we, as in a human development perspective, it's not just about the bad things, but we actually need supportive things for our development. We need these to grow in our best thriving version of ourselves. So come to an understanding then that trauma is not just about when the bad things happen. It's also when the good things don't happen, when we don't get what we need to support our best thriving development. And so our understanding of trauma from this perspective has changed from, it's not just when the bad stuff happens, but when the good stuff doesn't happen. And that's a very different understanding. It means that we can be, when the bad things are happening outside of us, we believe that it's our fault, and we make sense of the world by trying to understand what's wrong with us. And that's very clear because all of these bad things are happening around us. And we're like, that must be because of me. I must be unlovable. I must be unworthy. I must be stupid. I'm not good enough, or they would be treating me differently. But it's the same case if we're not getting what we need. If we're not allowed to play, if we're not believed, we're not prioritized, we're compared, we're not listened to, we're not attuned to, we're not understood, we're not getting what we need, is we still are like, why is this happening? Oh, this must be my fault. Something's wrong with me. So it's not just when the bad things happen, but when the good things don't happen, they have the very similar results inside of our development. And so the understanding that we've come to about trauma now from this perspective is that it's not about what happens to us, is that trauma is what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And that's a very different lens. It means that it's not about our traumatic experiences, but it's like what we used to say, and we still do this, but it was our understanding that if we can go through the ACEs and we can understand where you're at in the ACEs, we'll know what your level of trauma is. But there were outliers, right? There's always been outliers of people who are, oh, I show up as an 8 and I show up as a 9, but I'm not showing up in the same way of manifesting these impacts of trauma. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on there. And it helps to move to this understanding that trauma is not about our experiences alone. It's about the wounding inside of us from those experiences. And if we've had traumatic experiences, but we've been wrapped around with support, the ability to process, the ability to resolve what it is that we've experienced, will not have the same level of traumatic wounding. Or if we have different sensitivities to it, we may not have the same traumatic wounding. So when we're trying to understand what happened, it's really about exploring what's going on inside of a person. And we show many hints, many clues, all the ways we show up and act in the world are telling people about our traumatic wounding. And so for us, our definition now of trauma is that disconnection from our authentic self, the disconnection from the way that our birthright of showing up whole, present, and ready to thrive in the world. And when we have this disconnection from ourselves, it's really painful. It hurts to be in this space of being unprotected. It hurts to be in a space of feeling like something's wrong with us. And it hurts to be constantly on edge, looking around in the world. And that's not a place that that we want to exist as humans, right? We're wired differently than that. We're wired to survive. And so we can't stay in this place of pain so much. And so how does a child cope with the pain? Is that we learn to armor up, put on our coping mechanisms for the pain. And we learn that very early. And what might those coping mechanisms look like as we grow older? Or coping mechanisms or adaptive behaviors, we call them both of those things, is that we might have many different ways that we learn to ignore the pain that we're experiencing as a result of this wounding, as a result of the trauma. We might become very compliant. Ooh, if I just show up and do exactly what they want, I'm not going to be in further pain. If I just make myself invisible, they're not going to see me and none of this is going to come towards me. If I just become passive and give in to everything, maybe I can keep myself safe that way. If I'm over dependent and do what they want, what they need, I can keep myself safe. If I'm perfect in everything I do, maybe I can keep myself safe. Disregard my own needs. Literally don't feel what's going on inside of me. If I become a giver and a fixer and take care of other people, I can keep myself safe. And some of us distort the pain. It's all my fault. I'm helpless in getting out of this. It's not really as bad as it seems. It's just my parents are stressed, they're overworked, they have too many children, they have too much on their plate. Or my very personal favorite, magical thinking, is just, it didn't even really happen, just rewriting the history and telling ourselves a different story about what happened. And all of that is our ways of suppressing pain. The adaptive behaviors around, I'm just not going to feel it. Others of us transfer that pain. And that might be by trusting no one, showing no emotion, controlling others, manipulating and coercion, threats and intimidation. All the ways that we saw in the house that we call the house of abuse, disregarding authority, getting others before they get me, blaming and criticizing others, aggression, hostility, the self-sabotage, taking it upon ourselves. If I'm the biggest, the baddest, the strongest, the loudest, then I'm going to be right in this environment, this dangerous environment. And that if it's all about me, my needs are the only thing that matter. And some of us just sedate this pain, is that it's too much for me to feel all of this. It's too hard to be in this place. And I need to take myself out of it by any form of addiction. We talk a lot about drug and alcohol, and certainly we see a lot of addiction that way, but it's any form of addiction. It can be shopping, working out, gambling, sex, all the ways that we're like, just give me some temporary relief of what it is that I'm feeling inside. And so what we know about these adaptive behaviors is that, maybe you see these in this list, is that we still have enough of gender norming going on in our society that they tend to, though certainly not exclusively, that these tend to show up, they tend to show up gendered. And certainly not exclusively, and that's changing over time, but it helps us understand, wow, why is it the case that groups of people can show up more likely to have these behaviors? And certainly not making gender the only way, or that people show up through their social identity. It's all intersecting with all the ways, all the pieces that we were born into. But just understanding that it helps us give a lens and insight to some of the ways that we see this problem showing up, or these behaviors showing up, and showing up in ways that are gendered. And certainly sedating pain is an equal opportunity player. All of us are equally vulnerable to that method, that approach for dealing with our pain. And so what happens, how does this lead us to our understanding of what's going on in domestic violence? Is what we know is that people who show up in the suppressing pain as a giver, a helper, a fixer, blaming myself, discounting what I'm feeling, when we meet somebody who shows up with a transferring pain, abusive, battering, coercive, controlling, is that person fits our trauma like a jigsaw puzzle glove. Ooh, this person makes sense to me. I know how to deal with this. I know what this looks like. I know what this experience feels like. And we see that as a root cause of how this cycle continues. So both ways that we show up, we need to ask ourselves what happened. All the ways that we show up, in fact, just using these as an examples. When people show up manifesting behavior that is different from the truth of who they are, then our core question is, what happened? What happened in the life of this baby? What happened in the growth and development? What did they experience going on around them? And what happened all the complicated ways of it happening, not just what happened in the home, but all the different ways to understand. The Resma Medicum gives us an incredible understanding of this. He says, trauma in a person, decontextualized over time, can look like personality. That's just the way they are. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, can look like family traits. Ooh, that's just the way that family is. They've been like that for generations, passed on down through the generations. Maybe it's in their genes. We've heard a lot of that and seen a lot of science go down that path. And trauma decontextualized in a people over time can look like culture. But in all those cases, it's our job to ask, what is the wound? What is the wound? What is the trauma that actually grounds what's going on here for you in this individual life that you have showing up? What is the wound? And again, that's really important because how we see people is how we serve people, right? If we take this, somebody showing up with their lying, refusing, denying, minimizing, blaming, manipulative behavior, and we used to think that we knew what that meant. Oh, I know what's wrong with you. You're batterer, perpetrator, abuser, deadbeat dad. But instead, we see them as surviving, coping, protecting mechanisms. It gives us the insight to be asking what's underneath that. What's the wound? And that leads us to creating programming and creating the ways that we interact with people very differently because we're not seeing them as their behavior. We're getting behind it and understanding where that behavior comes from. Really importantly, and I've heard multiple times yesterday as well, is that this used to be a really difficult conversation to have even 5 years ago because the response to it was, quit making excuses for this dangerous behavior, this harmful, hurtful behavior. It's important to understand in the theory is that it's not an excuse. Not saying it's okay to act in this way. Oh, it's not pity for how a person shows up. Nor is it judgment, however, for what a person shows up. It's an explanation. If I understand this behavior as rooted in trauma, then I have a different way to approach it and to deal with it and to dig in around it and to support people in addressing it. And that's important because trauma, what we know through all of the literature now is that trauma can be healed. And that's a beautiful, powerful understanding that this isn't the way that we have to continue to be. And all those people back in all those generations want us to heal it. They don't want us to be carrying on the curse of that trauma, but instead to be stepping into breaking the cycle of that trauma, of healing the wound of that trauma. And why do we know that? Because underneath all of these impacts, underneath how we show up and walk through the world is the truth that our authentic soul, our authentic self is still there. It never goes away. And we know that. We all have experience of that, I think, where you're like, something inside of me knows something different. I might believe these things and I tell myself these things, but I have this little inkling that it's not totally right. Something inside of me is telling myself something different. In the help seeking, in the way of interacting with people, we have these voices inside, these parts of ourselves, the part of ourselves, our essential self, that is speaking to us. And for us, the process of healing means then that it is a reconnection to our authentic self. And so when we are developing programming, developing the way or understanding how we show up with people, is that this is the work that we're doing. How do we support people in reconnecting back to their authentic self? And on the announcement for this session that said we're going to dig into early childhood, and I'm going to do that because it's so easy and it's so tempting to not do that, because we can see so many ways that we're wounded as we walk out in the world, that it's easy to be like, that stuff's back there and it doesn't matter as much. But it's important, I think, for us to really dig in to early childhood, because that's the core. That's the core of what happened to us. That's why we start with the baby. That's why we think about where it is that the baby landed. And I just want to walk through how that shows up, for how our understanding of that helps inform the work that we do. Why is early childhood so important? Just think of the baby. We're so vulnerable. There's no way for us to survive without the care, the support, the love, and the nurturing of our parents or our caregivers. We literally cannot make it. And that is so different than other mammals. It makes us very exceptional as people. Horses pop out and they can walk. Giraffes pop out and they can walk. Elephants pop out and they can walk and social and engage in social interaction very quickly. Even little turtles pop out of their shell and they know how to make it to the water so that they can survive. We're the only mammals that have this level of prematurity, incredible prematurity when we're born. And that it's a prematurity in our needs, in our care. And it also means that only 25% of our brain circuitry is online at the time of birth. I always find this fascinating. That means if we were to be born at the level of a newborn chimpanzee, we would need another 18 to 21 months in utero to come out at that level of neurological and cognitive development. It gives a sense of how utterly dependent we are, and but we still come out with the ability to take in information. 25% of our brain is online. And what does that mean? Our brain has the a lot of parts, but three big parts: our survival center that regulates our automatic functions, our breathing, our digestion, our heart rate, our sleep. And it's the earliest part of our brain to come online. It develops in utero. The autonomic nervous system, for those of you who have studied the polyvagal system, and our limbic system, our emotional brain that processes emotions, regulates hormones, processes attachment. It gives us nurturing, anxiety, fear, social bonding, all of the ways that we connect with other people. Also is one of the earliest parts of our brain to come online. In utero, up to 3 years old, it's developing into its not fullest capacity, but it's developing into a full capacity. And then our neocortex, our thinking, cognitive part of our brain, comes online a lot later. So we're not thinking in logic, in problem solving, in distance and awareness and time. That part of our brain is not even online at birth. It's still premature and not developed. But all of these are wired together for our ultimate thriving. Is that our brain development is about how do we develop in ways that support all of this working together, and that we can thrive in the very best version of ourselves. Nonetheless, as we're born, it's only the two systems that are online: our survival center and our limbic system. And what that means is that sensory and emotional processes, rather than intellectual processes, serve as the brain's primary architect. And that is important in so many different ways about our development. It's not just our brain, of course, but also our central nervous system in the survival part of our brain that is already online. So all of this is about the communication that's going on inside our body, back and forth from our body to our brain, our stomach, our emotions, our back up and down from our body to our brain. That's not being processed and thought through. It's just being experienced. And so think about that. This little baby is experiencing the world, understanding the world from just sensory and emotional capacity. And so what is it taking in? What is the baby taking in the world? How is it relating and understanding to the world? And one of the ways that all of us as a birthright show up, because this is again about our humanity, is we show up with our authenticity. What I mean by authenticity is we show up connected to our emotions. We can already feel our emotions inside our body. They're experienced as inner states of being, and they can be expressed. We know they're expressed by watching the babies. It doesn't mean that we're understanding them or making sense of them. It means that we're experiencing them. And they are our gut feelings. And they're really important as part of our evolutionary development because they help keep us safe. Is this an environment where I'm afraid? Am I angry in this environment? They're there to help even a little baby, a newborn baby, understand what's happening in the ways that they can. So, for example, the baby might chest and throat feel tight, body feels heavy. The knowing, the sensory knowing in the baby is of sadness. Heart is racing, muscles are tense, hands are sweaty. Sensory knowing is of anger. Stomach hurts, breath is shallow. Sensory knowing is of fear. What's going on in my world? And these are really different sensory knowings, very different than interpretive knowings. So identification, for example, I'm sad rather than I have sadness inside of me. Interpretation, oh, I'm afraid, but only weak people are afraid. Anger, or for judgment, I'm angry. What's wrong with me? It's not right. It's not okay for me to feel angry. Of course, a baby doesn't have any of those interpretations. It's not even possible to have those interpretations because that part of our brain is not online. We're just literally feeling the feel of it and having a sensory experience of those emotions. Another way that we come into the world that is our birthright is an authentic attachment, meaning that we need the adults, we need people, caregivers, in our world to survive. So we have an instinctual drive for closeness and proximity to others, not only in the physical sense, like we need them to care for us, but also in an emotional sense. How do I attach to what am I giving out and what am I receiving for the purpose of caregiving, facilitating the caregiving between myself and the people. So we have attachment and we have authenticity. Authenticity, meaning that when we show up and our authenticity is respected, is that children have an invitation to exist in our presence exactly the way they are. We ourselves are not judging, making them wrong, punishing them for the way that they show up. They're invited to show up exactly the way that they are. And attachment relies on the availability of attuned, non-stressed, and emotionally reliable caretakers, which always hits me. The availability of attuned, non-stressed, and emotionally reliable caretakers, because if we think back about the culture that we all exist in, that the water that we swim in, it's very difficult in that culture to be able to show up fully attuned, non-stressed, and emotionally reliable for any of us. And the challenge is when there is a discord, competition between authenticity and attachment, meaning I am showing up in my truth, I'm expressing my true emotions, but when I express my true emotions, it's impacting the attachment to my caregivers. I can't be sad. I can't be angry. I get yelled at. I get screamed at. I get hit. I get beaten. That when there's a tension between these two, is that attachment wins every time. We have to figure out what we need to do to keep the attachment with the caregivers, the people who are responsible for us, because we literally need them to survive. And so what does that mean for our development? We talked about it before. It means that there's all these different proclivities and ways that we have, capacities that we have inside of us for showing up, but that our development is an interpersonal neurobiology, meaning that we show up in response to where we land. We develop in response to where we land. So just thinking of this visually is what it means, like, who do I need to be in this environment? Even as a little baby with 25% of our brain online, we're figuring it out. Do I need to be just adorable and perfect, and that's how I get the attention, the attachment that I need? Do I need to be strong, fearless, stoic? Is that how I get the attention? Do I need to be perfect at what I do? Do I need to be invisible, hide, nobody see me, nobody be aware of me, clingy and desperately needing? Do I need to be like, everything's okay, I'm all good? Screaming, hollering, gathering attention to get the attachment, or do I need to be like a little mini me to make sure that I keep the attachment of the people who I need to survive? So all of these are the ways that we disconnect from ourselves and they take us away from our ability fully to thrive in our authenticity and lead us to a survival way of being. What do I need to do? How do I need to suppress what is the truth of who I am just to get my survival needs met? And it's not like we are thinking about doing this, that we are like, what is it that I need to do? It's an automatic, instinctual process that happens inside of us for survival. And oftentimes when we show up manifesting those behaviors, it's identified as our pathology. Oh, you're codependent. Oh, you're anxious, you have anxiety, you're depressed, you're belligerent. But really we think of it as baby genius. It's our genius that that we've been able to figure out with the very limited tools that we have in our toolbox as babies, been able to figure out what is it that I need to do in this environment to get my needs met. And so we call that our baby genius inside. And that's a whole different way of understanding it, and a much more powerful and enriching and truthful way of understanding how is it that we get to who we are. As Resma Mencken said, that these traits inside of us, decontextualized from the trauma that we've experienced, they show up as our personality. And we think that's just who we are and just who other people are. But recontextualizing them and understanding where did this come from helps us get to the root of all the genius behind that. And it's another important part of why early childhood is so important is to remember that it's only our limbic and our survival brain that's online. Our cognitive part of our brain is not online. Why does that matter? Is because our cognitive brain is what gives us recall memory. Like we're playing a movie back, like we can tell a story, like we can attribute cause and effect. We understand time. We can sequence what happened. It's a recall of what happened. Our limbic and our survival brain gives us implicit memory. We know it in our senses and we know it in our emotions, but we literally cannot possibly have recall of it because it's pre-verbal, we don't even have the words for it. So by the time we actually have the words, the memory is already there. Our sense of self and our understanding is already there. It's like the blueprint of who we are and how we walk in the world. But if we don't dig in and try to get to the core of that, then we don't have a deep understanding of where it comes from. Our brain, of course, continues to develop. Our nervous system continues to develop. And by 3 years old, 75% of our brain is online. Self-awareness, language, time. Why did this happen? Problem solving. And we become meaning-making machines, right? Why did this happen? And we're out in the world trying to figure that out. And if we've experienced this kind of trauma, or if we've experienced the not getting our needs met, how do we figure it out? We figure it out by this is my fault. It's a repeat of what I said before, but hopefully putting it in the context of this is a natural developmental process. And it's a genius developmental process inside of us, not a pathology inside of us, but a genius way to survive what's going on in our world. So if it's my fault, then I'm wrong. And all of these ways of I'm wrong become our self-understanding, right? We make sense of the world by what's wrong with me. And they can show up a variety of different ways, but all of those ways are the clues. All of those ways are the clues to like, wow, what did happen? Why is it that I'm so sensitive to people calling me stupid? Why is it that I'm ready to fight and always looking for danger beside me? Why are these things there? Why do I think that I'm not good enough? Where did that come from? Not just the experiences that we have recall memory of, because those experiences we can understand, but they don't give us the depth of our core wound understanding. And so we get grown and we're like, why did this happen? Why am I like this? Who am I? And we're seeking explanations that are not about going deep enough and not telling ourselves the truth, being able to explore the truth of what happened. And it's helpful then to have that whole context of where does all this trauma come from? Because when we start to explore what happened, one place that we often go to is blaming all the people around us who hurt us and what they did to us. But if we can understand this, both as the trauma that has been unresolved, the pain that has been transferred forward, as well as our own genius inside to figure out how to survive that, I think our experience is that it gives a more hopeful and a more generative way to actually get our way out of it. So repeating a lot here, but this is one of the core messages, is that for us, our understanding of trauma is that disconnection from authentic self. And we know that trauma can be healed, and that healing is a process of reconnecting to authentic self. And again, repeating, I don't know, because I feel like it's worth repeating, because I always love to remind myself and remember it, is that reconnecting to authentic self is always possible. Always possible, because underneath all those impacts, all those ways we've dealt with and understood and tried to cover up the pain, underneath all of that is the truth that of the core of who we are, is the truth of that. Sorry, I just saw that there were chats and I got distracted. And one of the questions that seems to be coming up in the chat is, am I saying that every person who shows up with violent, coercive, and controlling behavior has trauma as the root cause? Because many people come in reporting to us that they have grown up in very healthy, nurturing, loving homes. And I hope there's some vantage point in answering that as I'm going through here, because I think that one of my great teachers is Gabor Mate. Many of you are probably familiar with him. And he calls this the happy childhood dilemma, I think it is, where we come in talking about our happy childhood. I've had such a happy childhood, but it doesn't take very long when we're taking this approach to discover that the happy childhood is part of the way we've distorted it in our own mind to protect from the pain. And again, that's not to say like that anything's wrong with our parents. It's just to say we brilliantly figured out a way to weave our way through and try to understand what happened. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just the black sheep. I don't know why I'm like this. I was just born bad in my family. No, none of us are born bad. None of us are disposable people, as was said earlier today. All of us have this authentic self inside of us. So if we're disconnected from the authentic self, the job is to explore the why this disconnection. And that, like I said, means that we have to get real about those concepts like the happy childhood, and not to blame or to disconnect ourselves from our people, but just to be like, why this? Why am I showing up curiously and compassionately, engaging with ourselves and engaging with the people in our family? So if that's our grounding belief, that all of us are born with our authentic self, that trauma is the disconnection from our authentic self. And how do we know that we're carrying unresolved trauma? We know because we act in ways that are very disconnected from that truth. And so our work becomes really different. Our work becomes supporting people in reconnecting back to their authentic self. And what does that actually look like? What does that actually look like? It means reconnecting back to loving, lovable, capable, worthy, whole, and enough. And the way that we do that work, call it healing-focused care or healing-centered practice, I think was one of the way that the panel was described. And healing-focused care is putting the human back into human service, right? Seeing every person who comes in. It's our job to see through all of those clouds, to see through all of the mess that we and they show up with, see through it, to see to the core of that authentic truth. And what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of how we do the work? I want to just put it in this context, is that the way that we started doing this work, I think, was that we were helpers, right? And helpers address the question, what is wrong with you? And that question is, my job is to fix you. Oh, I know what's wrong with you. My job is to fix you. And then we went to a trauma-informed approach. And that question we were addressing is, what happened to you? And my job is to understand you, to understand what happened. What are your experiences? And in a healing-focused care, we're answering a different question. What is right about you? What is right about you? And my job is to support you in uncovering that truth and uncovering your true self, the truth of who you are. And so it's a different way of doing the work. And what does that mean for the how? It means that our first job is to understand trauma. And that's why this long explanation of our understanding of trauma, because we often use the word and we often say that we're trauma informed or trauma focused. And the word has had a lot of different meanings and manifestations. So in grounding healing centered practice, it's important to have a shared understanding of what we're addressing. And for us, the trauma this is our understanding, deeply rooted in human development and compassion, right? And that's all of this. It's understanding all the different levels, all the different manifestations, all the interweavings of it, all the interconnectedness across these ways that trauma manifests in our life. But it's not just about understanding trauma, it's about doing our own work. And you heard a beautiful presentation from Jojapa yesterday about what that actually means. And why is that important is because if it's just about understanding all of this, and we haven't done our own work, that means we're still showing up using all those tools. And our curriculum developers, Jolene and Molly, have coined that cognitive bypass, or intellectual bypass, that we can understand everything. We know what we're talking about, and we can be super articulate in it, and even leaders in our field and leaders in the work that we do. But if we haven't done our own work inside, that means we're still going to be showing up, manifesting all the impacts of this unresolved trauma on the people we work with, the people we serve, and the people that we are intending to collaborate and to partner with. That we use all of the judgment, all of the manipulation, all of the coercion towards all of those groups of people. So healing focused care is learning, understanding trauma, but not keeping it only in our head, because it's not an intellectual enterprise. It's a depth enterprise of doing our own healing work. And then it's about being healing focused care, manifesting it in the way that we do our work. I'm going to finish up and then take some of the questions that are really wonderful. And what does that mean about the way that we do our work? It means, first of all, that we have to show up authentically in the truth of who we are. And woo, that is scary stuff. Scary stuff. This is not just about the people, you all out there that are messed up. This is about the way that I'm messed up as well, and the ways that happened to me. And I need to dig in and understand the core of what's going on with me. And that's scary, because we've worked so hard to put up the coping mechanisms to adapt our behavior to not show that authenticity, because we've been not received in our authenticity. We've chosen attachment over authenticity. Whatever attachment in our family, attachment in our social group, attachment in our intellectual group, attachment in our work group, we've chosen that over our authenticity many times. So it's scary to figure out how to show up. And so it takes bravery. We call healing focused care the A, B's, and 7 C's. So A, B, and 7 C's, authenticity, and then it takes bravery to overcome this fear. And so bravery, probably again, heard Jojapa say this yesterday, means that we are choosing love over fear. We're in the process in the Alma Center right now of going through some work with a human resource strategic guide. And she can't stand this word love used in a social service agency. Love, don't talk about love. You should talk about care and the ways you interact with people, but it's purposefully using it, because that's what we're wired for. That's who we are as humans, right? It doesn't mean that that there's unconditional, you can do anything and I'm just going to allow this, but it means that this loving, generative kindness towards people is the root of our interactions with people, because we're dealing with people, real people, human beings. So it's love, and the 7 C's are: we have choice in it, we engage curiously, collaboration. It's not for me up here and you down here, it's a collaborative process. Confidence in the work and the process and the ability to change. There's consistency in the way we show up. And there is, one second. Oops, mine just got stuck. Celebration of how hard it is, and all of the work and the joy in being able to do that work. And that all of this ways of showing up is rooted in compassion And compassion, many different layers of compassion. And I think that we know it when it's not there. The opposite of compassion is judgment. Some opposites of compassion are judgment, pity, apathy, and compassion is the opposite of that, like actually showing up, recognizing the other humanity, caring for the humanity of another person. And I see a lot of questions about, yeah, so what? How do you actually do this on the ground? What does this look like? What does your work look like? I hope that gave you, that understanding gives you some sense, or that conversation gives some sense of like how to prepare to do the work. Is that we deeply understand and study and translate. We don't stay up in our head with it. Oh, I'm the smartest person in the room because I can cite all the neural pathways of trauma, but get that information and understand it. And then what does this actually mean in our day-to-day life? Which I see is what a lot of people are asking. And then we continuously do our own work because that's a journey, not a destination. We're always trying to understand the ways that the impacts of our trauma are showing up. And then we do some work. We made this manifest in our curriculum called Through the Journey Toward Legacy curriculum. And I want to show you how that works for us is that we have an ongoing group for the working with people who have caused harm. And so that means people enter in at not a cohort, as you well know, but a variety of different places. So we've done like a circular pathway through. We have 3 domains that we work in: personal, interpersonal, and intergenerational. And all of those intersect in the question of why am I? And all of those are deeply seeped in the social cultural identity of how we show up. It's all intersectional, all together. And when we go through each one of those domains in our curriculum, we walk through 5 different elements. Those elements have been really gifted to us through the work of Jojapa, again, who you saw yesterday: fire, water, earth, mineral, nature. And what that means is that each of those elements for us have wisdom. When we are walking through the lens of fire, it's focused on our belief system, our thoughts. When we are walking through the lens of water, it's focused on our feelings, our emotional development. The lens of earth is focused on our coping mechanisms, our behavior. Mineral is on our transformation, our values, intentions, and purpose. And the lens of nature is focused on living through conscious choice. So what does that mean? Is that fire, I'm going to use the same pictures because I think it helps give an insight on how we've developed it, is that we've really taken our understanding of trauma and built it into the curriculum. So that fire is focused on our belief system. And what we do in this element, first in the personal domain and an interpersonal domain and an intergenerational domain, is that we're really digging into what's unconscious inside of us, trying to understand our worldview, our self-concept, just to understand our thoughts. Whatever is this belief system and where did it come from? And we are also like disrupting it, because as we become aware that we have a belief system, we become aware that we have a conscious choice about this. Oh, this is just the way I developed my understanding of the world. It's not the world. So fire is focused on disrupting, uncovering, gaining awareness of our belief system, and then disrupting that. Water, our next lens that we focus on, is on the emotional development. And it's not about, gets into a lot of what we're experiencing within our body, our somatic sensory experience of emotion, and also about creating, us being able to show up and create an environment and experience an environment that is safe enough for people to acknowledge what happened to them and then to reconnect to their feelings. Meaning that we have to be able to show up in a way that allows for and holds hard feelings. That if we get taken out when somebody shows up very disrupted by their feelings, then it communicates to people that their feelings are too much, not too much for us to handle. And so it's about really supporting the environment and the experience of people to feel and to know what they're feeling, reconnecting back with those feelings, reconnecting back with their authenticity and with their gut. In earth, we're looking at the interconnectedness of thoughts and feelings, bringing those into an understanding of how we've adapted behavior, how we've coped, and being able to unpack those adaptive behaviors, understand them as just like really brilliant adaptations to a very adverse situation that didn't support our thriving development. We geniusly figured them out. We geniusly attached to them, but they're not working anymore. And so the adaptive behaviors that got us here are not going to be the behaviors that get us out. So Earth is about skill understanding what we're doing and learning new skills, unpacking that behavior. The other element that we walk through is mineral, and mineral is about the transforming. So it's not very different than managing all of this trauma, but really transforming what we're carrying and getting to a deeper self. And so that is, again, a very experiential somatic process with some intellectual, we have some self-awareness about it, but it's also about, wow, how do I show up in my authenticity? What does that look like? And the nature, our final element in this rotation of the curriculum is about our evolution. Like at any point, at any time, we can choose to grow and to heal. And so what does that look like? If we are resolving what it is that we're carrying, how is it that we want to be in the world? How is it that we want to show up? And I'm going to back up a little bit here. So I realize I didn't put one final slide here. I just want to reiterate that how that then gets manifests in the curriculum is that each of these domains, we circle around each of the domains going through the 5 elements. So we're looking at thoughts, feelings, behavior, values, purpose, and transformation. And what's going on with me personally? How does that manifest interpersonally for me? And what have I learned, and how does that manifest intergenerationally for me? So so the way that we have operationalized it, sorry about this, in the way that we do the work is to really thoughtfully take that understanding of trauma and build it into a way of being and a curriculum that manifests that understanding in ways that actually support people in doing their own work, Like we're not there to teach people and we're not there to instill this in people. We're there to create an environment and to learn enough ourselves that we can support people in doing their own work around it. And I think I am going to stop sharing here, or wait, I'm going to do one more share. Whoops. That this is who I am, where we are. And then there are a whole bunch of questions that I was going to, Brittany, just stop sharing now and go to the questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Or if anybody has any burning ones that right now they would like to add. It seems that there's an assumption that interventionists are engaging with participants in disrespectful, blaming, and punitive ways. Where does that assumption come from? That is a really good question. That assumption for me, and that's why I began this conversation with, I am so delighted to be here in this conversation, because I've been working in this field for 30 years, doing this work for 20. And I would say that our understanding of this work, the way that we've done it, has developed over those 20 years. But even 20 years ago, we knew that this is rooted in like something's going on inside of people. This isn't just about what's going on in people's heads, it's going on with what's inside of people. And so we knew that, but it really 20 years ago was not safe to even be talking about that understanding, because that understanding was about are you coddling abusers and perpetrators, making excuses for them, making their behavior okay by saying that it could be what's going on with them. And so the programs that we built in the beginning of the movement they really were about, this is really bad behavior. You are a bad person. And I can get you out of this behavior by shaming you and pointing out how bad of a person you are. And that may be a little bit too rough for it, but that is pretty much how we started. And there's nothing wrong with starting there. We were responding to real violence and damage that was happening in people's lives, and we're trying to make sense of it. And so that's a place that we made sense of it. But what has happened over this time, and for people who are coming in new right now, is, wow, this has been a development over time to say this behavior is actually rooted in something that we can understand. We've long known that little boys and little girls both grow up in families. Little boys, little girls, all of us grow up in families where we experience, we witness violence, abuse, not getting our needs met, and that impacts us. But as we aged up in the old way of doing it, the girls, we understood as, oh, you're showing up in this way that being re-victimized because you're carrying trauma from the past. And boys who grew up showing behavior that was transferring their pain to other people, violent or abusive behavior, they became bad batterers, perpetrators. So we have the same root understanding in many ways, but we dealt with it very differently. There's two very different paths for this behavior. And that's not to say that there's not a path of physical restraint for some people and safety. That is very real in people's lives as well. But it is to say our root out of it, our root out of the behavior is addressing the common root of that behavior. It's addressing it in the trauma. And I don't mean to make it an assumption that programs are still operating in that, or that people who are doing this work are showing up in punitive ways or not treating people from this respect, but just making it expressive that all that we've learned over these decades, these 3 decades, has made it such that, wow, this really is our understanding of the work and where it comes from and how to do the work. Hope that makes sense. There's a couple of people who are asking about the innate physiology behind it. Is there some ways that people just show up because this is like a physiological or neurological disruption or challenge, or really a diagnosis, a physiological problem that's going on inside of them? And that is another way that we have tried to understand this, is that we've said this behavior is rooted in our neurology. There may be a chemical imbalance. There may be something going on. And for a small percentage of people, that might be true. But I think even the recently retired director of not Health and Human Services, I can't think of the name of it, who did the federal agency that does all of SAMHSA, is saying that are trying to understand this behavior as some sort of chemical imbalance and finding the right chemicals and finding the right drugs to give people that would help them overcome this behavior has not led us down a path that has been very fruitful. We've been studying this for 20 years and we've not been able to diagnose, we've not been able to find the neurological path that would explain the whys of the behavior. Instead, we're medicating the symptoms of it. So that understanding has really been busted wide open by the new psychology and trauma research that's saying that that's because we're not understanding it the right way, is that we can't keep just looking at the chemicals of brain science to understand people's behaviors and how they show up. We have to look at the interpersonal neurobiology of our development. And in the interpersonal neurobiology of our development, we'll get the understanding of why we're showing up in this way, the whys that are behind it, so that we can actually develop more effective hows for dealing with what's going on with people and how they're showing up. I hope that makes sense. Okay, somebody just asked, I know we think that this is the professional development version of this layered topic. Still ask, where is the professional version of this? LOL. I appreciate the LOL. All this makes 100% sense in understanding ourselves and how we move in the world, but rarely are these deep-rooted facts understood in our work environments as we expected to fix things, fix people, and not to mention meet numbers. Woo. Literally, we can take a moment of silence for that question, because why is that? Why is that? We're the workers, we're the people who are involved in the movement. We're the people who are designing it. And so maybe in the same way that the trauma research is questioning our long-held understanding of mental health processes, these same questions are coming up now in the work that we're doing here. How are we doing this work with these numbers and with the numbers of people showing up? And how do we hold these two tensions? How do we actually address the real concrete needs of people who are showing up, as well as getting to the root of the why and the how of their showing up? And that's when, for us, when I think about healing focused care and say that it's about doing healing focused care, we learn, we heal, and we do it, is that that's about our own capacity to show up with creativity and courage and bravery and curiosity and all of that, and to be able to ask those real questions. And I hear in that question as well that it's not just about us at the level of doing the work, but us at a level of leadership. And that's really what has been happening in this conference to me, and what has been happening as we are learning over these decades how to do the work. It's manifesting in different ways. Brittany, is this working, just addressing them one by one?
Yeah, I think so. There was one question here that was responded, I think, when you started to operationalize things. And I just wanted to know if you can provide some clarity there. Someone was asking that you used to work on, is there a second group? I think there was maybe just some confusion on that. If you can just provide some clarity.
Is there a
about what the
second group?
programming is. Yeah.
Oh, so how do people actually get into the programming? Is that the question? Like, what does the program look like?
Yeah, can you just share a little bit about that? I think when you were talking, I think they were confused about the groups. So if you want to just talk about that a little bit, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So what I was explaining at the end, and sorry if it was confusing, is that what we've done with this understanding is to develop it into a full curriculum of the way that we work with people. And both two things. First of all, an approach of the healing focused care, so that we have to be working on ourselves to do this work. And then secondly, in the actual curriculum work that we do with people. And there's ways in which I hesitate to say curriculum, because I think that the way that we've used that in the past is that this is the A, B, C, D, E, F, and G of how you do it. And that's not what I mean by curriculum. It means this is the purpose of this day. This is the purpose of being with these people. Neither in this day, being together and joining this day. And these are some guidelines of how to do it, of what to do. But really, it's about addressing the purpose. And then, sorry, I just came in with a chat and I'm easily distractible, is that the curriculum, people come to our program. Many people are mandated by the criminal justice system still to come into the program, and people are also coming from a variety of different sources. They're mandated into the program. We do a very intensive intake. We usually spend 1 to 3 hours with a person going through what we just talked about in trauma, just like opening up that question with, who are you? What's important for me to know to understand who you are? And talking through their life, their history, and their understanding. From there, a person goes into an orientation, because some people come in not ready to do this work. A lot of people come in not ready to do the depth of this work. They come in blaming everybody else but themselves for it, and come in very angry about the system and not seeing themselves in this idea of trauma at all. And so we see it as our work to be able to support people in coming to a different understanding of how they got there, how they got to us, and who they are. So people come from an individual session into a group session that's 6 hours long. And really what I shared today in our understanding of trauma is very much what we share in our orientation, because many of us don't have the understanding of it. And so we have really worked, like I said, to take the bigness of the ideas and translate them into really digestible information that ourselves and the people who come to us have a very shared language around it, so that we are able to talk about worldview, self-concept, traumatic wound, adaptive behavior, coping mechanisms, the core wound that we're carrying. So we're developing, like, this is our shared understanding of our human development. And that happens in an orientation that is a deep dive into learning about trauma. And it's literally I'm not going to say the most fun, but it's one of those extraordinary experiences to have, because people come in, they've had an intake and they've had the experience of being listened to and being heard and being believed, not excused, but believed. And then, but that changes a little bit. They go out in the world and they come back with the edge back on a little bit, and then come into a deep dive learning session, a 6-hour learning session with a little bit of that edge maybe still back on. And during that time of just like collectively working through our understanding of trauma, you can see so much of the defenses go down and so much recognition of self in that process. Like, wow, why didn't I know this? Why aren't we given, why is this information not accessible to me? I've had this understanding of myself as really being the black sheep, that something really is wrong with me. Why hasn't this been part of my understanding? So I think almost to a person, that process engages a level of curiosity and a level of like desire to dig deeper. From the orientation we had done previously and are getting back to, COVID did a little interruption in the process and flow of our programming, is that from orientation, we go into a program application process, which gives people who are coming to us the opportunity to explore their reasons for wanting to be in the program. And what we're trying to do with that is to change the motivation from what is, I have to be here, I'm forced to be here, for people to look inside and to ask themselves, oh, why am I here? What can I get out of this? What does this offer for me? And they are asked to give 10 reasons why they should be admitted to the program. And none of those reasons can be, my judge is making me do it, my agent's making me do it, I don't want to go to jail. They have to be real manifest. I mean, you can put those reasons down, but they do not count as the 10 reasons because they are intended to be reasons that are about what's going on inside of you. From the program application, they go into an ongoing group, and our groups meet for 6 months, twice a week. We do have a program that also meets for 6 months, once a week, but in general, people are going into a group-based program that's twice a week for 6 months, some on Zoom and some in person, not within each class. There are classes that are on Zoom and there are classes that are in person. And they're also about creating a generative environment around people to put some support around other needs that they may recognize, of course, that people are coming in not just to deal with their trauma and have a lot of other survival things going on in life related to housing and transportation and employment and all of those things. So we do wrap around some of that social support around people and also partner with other community-based organizations that are doing that. And then there is a completion of that process at about 6 months and an open invitation to continue to engage in the services. We just also are beginning to implement the possibility of some individual trauma work during that process to when people find that they have identified a real stuckness that's going on inside of them, they have an opportunity to do some creative individual work around that as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was great, Terri. There's another specific question about what percentage of those you serve in your programming are mandated, and how much information do you share with the judicial system of those who are mandated?
Thank you. It's a good question. Right now, somewhere between 80 and 85% are mandated at various stages of mandating. Let me say that. There are various ways of mandating. Some of those are through the criminal system, some of those are through the family system, and some of those might be through family court, others might be through a divorce proceeding, and there's somewhat different avenues of programming for those various ways in. What we share with the court, we are a regular presenter in Milwaukee. I think I said that we're from Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, we have about 10,000 domestic violence arrests per year. And right now we have an abysmal charging rate of those arrests. Not that I think that's necessarily the way that we need to deal with it, but just giving some context with it. That's probably around 30 to 40%. And we have 3 domestic violence courts that deal only with domestic violence cases. So one way that we share information in the court is that we regularly are in communication with the judges, the district attorney's office, and the public defender's office about our approach. So they are like, probably you could ask any of the judges, any of the prosecutors and any of the public defenders about the work that they do. I mean, most of them would be able to say it's healing focused care. They do trauma work. They have a deep understanding of that work. And so and I would say that over time, they've developed respect for that work. So that's part of our interaction with them. Recently, in the past 3 years, when we did the curriculum redesign, we have been able to get it certified as evidence-based practice with Department of Corrections, the statewide Department of Corrections in Wisconsin, which was a really phenomenal thing for us, because in the past that has only been CBT programming has been the gold standard, and they have said that trauma is not an appropriate response for domestic violence. So it took us a good year of COVID worth of work to actually get it as a evidence-based practice. And so they too are aligned with the work that we do. And so one of the ways that I would say we communicate is by, as much as we can, doing trainings and sharing information and talking about it in this way, so that we hope that there is actually some shared language across our system in regard to the work that we do. And we have I should say as well, we have a very close and deep relationship with Sojourner Family Peace Center, who is our largest victim serving agency, and we have a shared language with them around this work as well. And then when it comes to specifically sharing with the courts, we do progress reports that are not very detailed, that are about participation, engagement, and showing up. So we have individual conversations, but we don't put a lot of detail in the reports that we're sharing. But we can do that on an individual basis. Other things, Brittany?
Thank you so much for that, Terri. I'm just scrolling through. There's so many questions here. So I think what we're also going to do, because we're almost at time, I think we'll maybe have time for one more question, but we will also just communicate with Terri on the back end and see if there's a way to get some answers to some of these questions as well. So someone was talking a little bit more about your curriculum in general, or the HFC approach. How could folks get access to the curriculum, or what would that look like if folks are interested in incorporating or implementing any of that in their communities?
Brittany, can you just put my email in the chat, or just you can contact me directly. That's probably the easiest way to do that.
Perfect.
Or the website, but the website leaves a lot to be desired, Rebecca. We're in process of redoing that. So you can look at the website, or you can contact me directly, and then you can be like, oh wow, they really do know what they're doing, without looking at the website.
Yeah. I think another theme here, and this might be the last question, I think you've addressed part of it before, but any other thoughts on this? But someone was saying that they appreciate this type of work for all of us in all of our lives. I see a dog wants to join and answer this question. It's a big one. But it does look like some of the work, should be done in a therapeutic relationship, and it's in their community. It's never really been done in the APIPs in their CCR. I'm just curious if this looks different in other communities, or your thoughts on kind of that potential shift in getting into that work.
It's a radical shift. No, unquestionably, it's a radical shift in that approach. And and I'm out on a limb here, but I'm not on a limb by my own. I'm on a limb with a lot of the leading trauma theorists, is that I think that we have given this approach over to only a mental health therapeutic perspective. And as we learn more about trauma and understand it as an embodied process, a neurophysiological human development process, it opens up our way for dealing with it. It means that we as humans can actually work with each other to resolve the trauma. And again, if we think about that timeline, about how long we've been here, and the little bit of culture, the little bit of that timeline that is about the way that we currently do this work, I think that gives us a breadth of understanding as well. That cultures, peoples all over the world for a long time have known have access to ways to resolve trauma that has not been about the mental health diagnostic approach or the pathological approach that we have here. It's just about opening up that understanding, building relationships with therapeutic approaches, and understanding who takes this same approach in our community.